My next one, Pastor Steve, is from Wendy. She says, please explain in more detail about the story in Revelation being told over and over again. Do you mean that the seals, trumpets, bowls are all speaking of the same events and just more detail is given in each event? I've thought this for years and never heard anyone else speak on this like you do. Please explain in more detail if you need, and that's it.
Okay.
On other things.
And it's Wendy?
Yes. Wendy.
Okay. Wendy, when you look at, it's going to be a little bit long, but I'll try to shorten this up. When you look at the seal judgments, for example, this is what I believe about the passage. There's a lot of guys who go through the book of Revelation and try to make each set of judgments chronological. In other words, first the seal judgments, and then come the trumpet judgments, then come the bowl judgments, and there's some other judgments in there that we see, and others that are mentioned but we don't know anything about. And then you finally get to the last bowl judgment, and you have the second coming of Christ, and it's over. Problem with that is when you go through the seal judgments, when you look at the sixth seal, it says, I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. The stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, and the mighty men, every slave, every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? The reason I'm pointing that out is because that's the exact same language that Jesus used of events that were going to take place right before the second coming. In fact, in Matthew chapter 24, when he's talking about the tribulation period, he gives a series of events that are going to take place before he comes back to the earth to set up his kingdom, and he wraps it up with this. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Obviously, talking about the same event. And so, whatever you want to do with chronology, I see no way out of the fact that the sixth seal is talking about the second coming of Christ. And when you go through and you look at the bowl judgments, when you look at the last bowl judgment over in Revelation chapter 11, it says this: Then the seventh angel sounded, the kingdoms and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders who sat before God on their thrones fell on their faces, worshiped God, saying, we give you thanks, O Lord God Almighty, the one who is and who was and who is to come, because you have taken your great power and reigned. The nations were angry, your wrath has come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Well, those are all events that are going to take place at the second coming. And then it goes on and says, the temple of God was open in heaven, the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple, and there were, again, lightnings, noises, thunderings, an earthquake, and great hail. So stuff fallen from the heavens, a great earthquake, and so on. And again, those are things that are common to the sixth seal, and also common to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24. You got the same thing with the bowl judgments. When you get to the last bowl judgment, it says, seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air. This is chapter 16, in verse 17. And a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, it is done. And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake. And again, you have this whole thing with an earthquake. Such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. The great city was divided into three parts. The cities of the nations fell. Babylon was remembered before God. Then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Well, that happened in Revelation 6. And so how many times are you getting rid of the islands and the mountains? And you can only do it once. And great hail from heaven fell upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent, and men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, since that plague was exceedingly great. And so falling stars, great hail, and in all of those passages. And the whole idea of falling hail is not necessarily talking about ice. And so the language that's used there can include rocks falling from heaven. So again, you have that. I don't believe that they're exactly the same story told over and over again. I believe that what you have here is a situation where each one of the judgments, the bowl or the trumpets or the seal judgments, end in the same place. I think they all end at the second coming of Christ. And the reason I say that they're not exactly the same story, it looks like Revelation 6 is kind of an overview. It's kind of a real general outline of what's taking place in the tribulation period. In fact, you can tie each one of the seal judgments back to Matthew chapter 24. Jesus talks about each one of those issues there. When you get to the bowl judgments or the trumpet judgments, you have a third of the trees burnt up, and a third of the sea turns to blood, and a third of the sun and the moon and the stars cease giving their light. And when you get to the bowl judgments, the whole sea is dead by that time. And so that's a cascading event. So something starts in the trumpet judgment and ends up with a bowl judgment with the whole ocean being dead. And so you can see that obviously the bowl judgments would be following some of the events that are taking place with the trumpet judgments. But like I said, they all end up in the same place. And so the way that Jews tell stories, classically speaking, is they'll give you an overview of a story, and then they'll come back and they'll give you more detail. And it will be the same story, but more detailed. You see that in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's the same story told from different directions with the same events.
So for us simpletons, to simplify that, each trumpet, seal, bowl is a description of details that ends at the second coming.
That's what it looks like.
And each one gives a little bit different details, but talking about the same event.
Right. So when you're talking about the trumpet judgments, for example, the trumpet judgments would have to start before the bowl judgments start, but they end in the same place.
Okay.
And so he's taken a view of that period of time and telling you specifics about certain judgments that are going to take place, but they end with the second coming. So again, the second bowl, and so these are in order. Mm-hmm. These are chronological. This second bowl, it says, the angel pours out his bowl on the sea, and it became blood as of a dead man, and every living creature in the sea died. Well, when you're talking about the trumpet judgments, it's a third that die. And so obviously that judgment has to take place first, and then this takes place later. So they can't start in the same place. Right. Yeah.
And so is there anything that contradicts it when you're going through there as far as one before the other or weird out of place things? It pretty much fits?
Yeah, it all fits.
So understanding the Hebrew language and how they write is key to that because, which now that I'm thinking of it, it's like even worse because it's not like here and then more and more. It's like all of that at once is going on.
Yeah.
Like it's judgment of God expounded. So why, though, would you have, the description of a scroll being basically opened and it looks like it's one after another? Is it just because we don't understand the Hebrew culture?
Well, the scroll is...
We think about it different because we don't?
The scroll is the seven seals.
Right, but it looks like as he's opening it, he's just reading,
Yeah, and he is with the seven seals.
But the trumpet and the bowls?
Yeah, the trumpet and the bowls come out of that whole thing. And so it's kind of like sub-chapters and certain sections. So the trumpet judgments start after the seventh seal, but that chapter starts in the midst of it. There's an outline to the book of Revelation, and so there'll be six judgments. there'll be a parenthesis where there's an encouragement, and then you have the seventh. And then the trumpet judgments do come out of the seal judgments, but it comes out of the seventh seal, not out of the sixth one. The sixth one looks like it's the second coming of Christ. The seventh seal is another thing altogether. And so it's just a literary way to tie things in.
Right.
But again, you can't have the mountains being destroyed twice.
Right.
They're destroyed once.
Right.
You can't have the islands being destroyed twice. And so, again, it looks like they end in the same place. So it's all tied together. But when I look at the opening of the seven sealed scroll, that's the very beginning of the book of Revelation. And so it's a grand outline of what's going to take place during that time. And then when he opens the seventh seal, then we go into the trumpets and the bowls, and all the other stuff in between too.
All right, Wendy, good question. Thanks for tuning in and reaching out. Appreciate it.